A truck driver was traveling down a lonely highway in North Carolina before sunrise when he noticed something unusual ahead. At first, he assumed his eyes were playing tricks on him. The weather was terrible. Rain had been falling for hours. The road was nearly empty. But as he got closer, he realized he was looking at a child, a little girl, alone, walking alongside the highway at nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. Concerned for her safety, the driver slowed down. Then he turned his vehicle around. He wanted to make sure she was okay. But the moment the girl noticed the truck approaching, she did something completely unexpected. Instead of asking for help, she ran. She sprinted away from the roadside and disappeared into the darkness. That little girl was 9-year-old Asha Degree. And more than 20 years later, nobody knows what happened to her. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most mysterious and heartbreaking disappearances in American history. But before we begin, welcome to Bright Dawn's True Crime. Here, we explore true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, disappearances, criminal investigations, and the stories that continue to puzzle investigators years later. If that's something you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. Before we continue, a quick disclaimer. The content in this video is presented for educational, documentary, and discussion purposes. The information is based on publicly available reports, investigative findings, and media coverage available at the time of production. The goal is to examine the facts surrounding the case while remaining respectful to the victims, their families, and everyone affected. Now, with that said, let's begin tonight's case. To understand how a 9-year-old girl ended up alone on a highway before dawn, we first need to understand who Asha Degree was before she disappeared. In February of 2000, Asha lived with her family in Shelby, North Carolina. Shelby was a quiet community where neighbors knew one another and families generally felt safe. Asha lived there with her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, and her older brother, O'Brien. By all accounts, she was an ordinary child. She enjoyed spending time with her family. She played basketball. She attended school regularly and was known as a polite, respectful, and responsible student. Teachers remembered her as hardworking and well-behaved. Friends described her as kind and friendly. Family members later said she could be shy around strangers, but was loving and outgoing with people she knew well. There was nothing about Asha that suggested she was planning to run away from home. In fact, those who knew her best described her as exactly the opposite. She was cautious. She followed rules. And according to several family members, she was afraid of the dark. That small detail would later become one of the most puzzling aspects of the entire investigation. Because what happened on the morning of February 14th would seem completely out of character for the little girl everyone thought they knew. And it all began with what appeared to be a completely ordinary weekend. The weekend before Asha disappeared had been busy, but otherwise unremarkable. On Saturday, she had taken part in a basketball game. Like many children her age, she cared deeply about her team and wanted to perform well. During that game, Asha missed an important shot. Her team lost. For most adults, that might sound insignificant. But anyone who remembers being 9 years old knows that small disappointments can sometimes feel enormous. According to people who knew her, Asha was sensitive and took things to heart. Still, there was no indication that the game had caused any serious emotional distress. The following day, Sunday, life continued as normal. The Degree family attended church and spent time together. Nothing seemed unusual. No arguments, no strange phone calls, no alarming behavior. If there was something troubling Asha, she gave no obvious sign of it. As evening approached, a storm system moved across the area. Rain lashed against windows. Strong winds swept through the neighborhood. In some parts of the county, power outages were reported. For many families, it was the kind of night that encouraged everyone to stay indoors. Inside the Degree home, the evening followed a familiar routine. The children prepared for school the next day. The family relaxed together. Eventually, everyone began settling down for the night. At some point, Asha and her brother went to bed. They shared a room, something that was not uncommon in many households. According to later accounts, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. No one noticed unusual behavior. No one saw Asha packing belongings. No one heard her discussing plans. Everything seemed exactly as it always had. Meanwhile, outside, the weather continued to worsen. The darkness was broken only by occasional passing headlights and the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. Most of Shelby was asleep. Asha's father, Harold, had been working late and returned home around midnight. Before going to bed, he checked on the children. Both appeared to be sleeping peacefully. The house was quiet. Nothing seemed wrong. A short time later, he checked again. Once more, everything appeared normal. The children were in bed. The house was secure. There was no reason to suspect that anything unusual was about to happen. Yet sometime during the next couple of hours, events took a dramatic turn. Investigators later concluded that Asha got out of bed while the rest of the household slept. She quietly gathered a few belongings. Among the items believed to have been taken was her backpack. Then, somehow, she left the house. What makes this moment so fascinating from an investigative standpoint is how little evidence it produced. There was no sign of forced entry, no damaged doors, no broken windows, no indication of a struggle. The scene suggested a calm departure rather than a chaotic one. Whatever prompted Asha to leave, it happened without waking anyone else inside the home. As the clock moved toward dawn, the mystery deepened. Several miles away, motorists began traveling along Highway 18. Most were focused on reaching work or completing deliveries. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would later become national news. One driver noticed a small figure moving beside the road. The sight immediately struck him as unusual. Children were not supposed to be there, especially not at that hour. Especially not during a storm. At first, he assumed there had to be an adult nearby, perhaps a parent, perhaps a stranded motorist. But as he continued watching, he realized the child appeared to be completely alone. The driver later described seeing a young girl wearing light-colored clothing and carrying what looked like a bag. The image stayed with him. Something about the situation felt wrong. Another motorist reported a similar observation. Independent witnesses, traveling separately, described nearly the same thing. For investigators, this would become one of the strongest pieces of information in the entire case, not because it explained what happened, but because it established something important. Asha had apparently traveled much farther from home than anyone initially imagined. The reports transformed the investigation. What had begun as a local search around a residential neighborhood suddenly expanded into something much larger. Police now had reason to believe that Asha had been moving through areas far beyond the immediate vicinity of her home. But the witness accounts contained another detail that would leave investigators scratching their heads. One of the drivers became concerned enough to stop and check on the child. It was a reasonable reaction. Most people would do the same. The weather was terrible. The road was dangerous. And the child appeared vulnerable. Yet the response he received was not what he expected. As he approached, the girl moved away from him. Then she disappeared from view. Within seconds, she was gone. The driver was left standing there in the darkness, unsure of what he had just witnessed. At the time, he could not have known that he had likely been one of the last people ever to see Asha Degree. And while search teams would soon descend on the area in enormous numbers, the next discovery would raise even more questions than it answered. By sunrise, The quiet neighborhood surrounding the Degree home had been transformed into the center of a major search operation. Police officers arrived, volunteers began gathering, neighbors left their homes to help. Everyone hoped the situation would have a simple explanation. Perhaps Asha had become lost. Perhaps she had taken shelter somewhere and would soon be found safe. But as the hours passed, that optimism slowly began to fade. Search teams spread across fields, wooded areas, roadsides, and nearby properties. Dogs were brought in to track scent trails. Officers knocked on doors. Residents were questioned. Anyone who might have seen something unusual was encouraged to come forward. The challenge facing investigators was enormous. They were searching for a child who had disappeared during the night, in bad weather, with very little information about where she might have gone. Rain can be devastating to an investigation. It washes away footprints. It damages potential evidence. It makes scent tracking significantly more difficult. In this case, investigators believe the weather had likely erased clues that might otherwise have helped them reconstruct Asha's movements. As the search continued, attention shifted toward an area near where witnesses had reported seeing the young girl. There, investigators made an intriguing discovery. Not far from the roadway stood a small outbuilding used for storage. The structure wasn't large. It wasn't somewhere people normally paid much attention to. But once investigators examined it, they became interested. Inside and around the building, several items were reportedly located that suggested a child may have been there at some point during the night. The discovery was significant because it offered investigators something they desperately needed: a potential location connected to Asha's journey. For the first time, detectives could begin piecing together a possible route rather than relying solely on witness statements. Yet the finding created new questions. If Asha had sought shelter there, how long had she stayed? Was she alone? Did she leave on her own? Or had someone encountered her after she arrived? Unfortunately, the evidence could not provide clear answers. Investigators continued collecting information from every possible source. Teachers were interviewed, friends were interviewed, family members were interviewed. Detectives worked methodically through Asha's daily life, looking for anything that might explain her disappearance. What they found was remarkable. The deeper they looked, the fewer obvious explanations appeared. There was no known conflict, no known secret life, no known behavior pattern that pointed toward a planned disappearance. In many missing person cases, investigators eventually identify warning signs that seem obvious in hindsight. In Asha's case, those warning signs were frustratingly absent. As news of the disappearance spread, media coverage increased. Television stations began reporting on the case. Newspapers published photographs. The story quickly attracted public attention because it contained so many unusual elements. A young child, a stormy night, independent witness sightings, and then complete silence. People across North Carolina became invested in finding answers. Tips started arriving from different locations. Some callers believed they had seen Asha. Others reported suspicious individuals or vehicles. Every lead had to be checked. Every possibility had to be explored. Investigators knew that somewhere within the growing mountain of information could be the detail that solved the case. Months passed. The investigation remained active. Yet despite the enormous effort being invested, no major breakthrough emerged. Then, more than a year later, something extraordinary happened. A discovery made entirely by chance would suddenly thrust the case back into the spotlight. In August of 2001, workers clearing land in a rural area made an unexpected find. Buried in the ground was an item that immediately caught investigators' attention. When authorities examined it, they realized it belonged to Asha. It was her backpack. The location alone was shocking. The backpack had been found approximately 26 miles from her home. That distance immediately raised serious questions. How had it traveled so far? Who had transported it? And perhaps most importantly, why had it been hidden? According to reports, the backpack had not simply been discarded. It appeared to have been deliberately concealed. For detectives, that distinction mattered. A lost item is one thing. A hidden item is something entirely different. The backpack was carefully transported to forensic specialists for examination. Every object inside was cataloged. Every detail was documented. Investigators hoped the contents would provide a direct path toward the truth. Instead, they encountered another layer of mystery. Among the belongings were items that investigators did not immediately connect to Asha. Their presence sparked intense interest. Where had they come from? Who had placed them there? And what role, if any, did they play in the events surrounding her disappearance? For the public, the discovery changed the entire tone of the investigation. The case was no longer simply about a missing child. Now, there was physical evidence suggesting that at least one person besides Asha may have been involved. Someone had possession of that backpack after she vanished. Someone had transported it. Someone had taken the time to hide it. And that realization would force investigators to consider a much darker possibility. Because if another person had handled the backpack, then that person might also know exactly what happened to Asha Degree. And in the next part of this story, we'll look at the evidence found inside the backpack, the investigative developments that followed, and the theories that continue to divide people more than 2 decades later. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has subscribed to the channel. And for those who haven't, YouTube analytics show that more than 90% of viewers who watch these videos are not currently subscribed. If you enjoy true crime, unsolved mysteries, and criminal investigations, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and allows me to continue bringing you stories like this one. Now, let's get back to the case. When investigators began examining the contents of Asha's backpack, they hoped they might finally uncover a clue that would point them toward a suspect. Instead, they found themselves facing yet another puzzle. Some of the items appeared ordinary. Others seemed completely out of place. Among the objects that attracted the most attention were a New Kids on the Block t-shirt and a copy of the book McElligot's Pool. Neither item was believed to belong to Asha. That immediately raised an important question. How had these objects ended up with her belongings? Investigators never publicly revealed a definitive explanation. Because of that, the items became some of the most discussed pieces of evidence in the entire case. Unlike fingerprints, DNA, or surveillance footage, these objects did not provide a direct answer. What they offered instead was a possible glimpse into an unknown person connected to the case. The challenge was determining whether that connection was meaningful or merely coincidental. As detectives continued their work, they began looking at everyone who might have crossed paths with Asha during the weeks and months before she vanished. The investigation expanded far beyond Shelby. Records were reviewed, interviews were revisited, old leads were re-examined. Cases involving children often require investigators to think differently. Adults generally leave behind extensive trails of information. Children do not. A 9-year-old rarely has financial records, private travel arrangements, or independent social networks. As a result, detectives had to reconstruct Asha's world through the people around her. Teachers described a student who appeared engaged in school. Friends did not report unusual conversations. Relatives could not identify obvious warning signs. Investigators were essentially searching for a missing piece in a puzzle that seemed almost complete. Then another challenge emerged: time. As months became years, memories became less reliable. Witnesses forgot details, locations changed, potential evidence disappeared. Every unsolved case faces this problem eventually. The longer a mystery remains unresolved, the harder it becomes to separate useful information from noise. Yet despite these obstacles, law enforcement never officially closed the investigation. The case remained active. New tips continued to arrive. Fresh leads occasionally surfaced, and advances in forensic science created opportunities that had not existed when Asha first disappeared. During the following years, investigators quietly revisited pieces of evidence using newer technology. Methods that were unavailable in 2000 became standard practice. Evidence could now be examined in ways that detectives from the original investigation could only have imagined. This renewed effort gave many people hope that answers might still be possible. Public interest also remained unusually strong. Many missing person cases slowly fade from public memory. Asha's case did not. Perhaps it was because of her age. Perhaps it was because of the unusual circumstances. Or perhaps it was because the mystery never seemed to fit neatly into any existing explanation. People continued discussing the case decades later because so many details resisted easy answers. One of the most frequently discussed possibilities involved the idea that Asha may have trusted the wrong person, not necessarily a stranger. In many child abduction cases, the offender is someone the victim already knows or recognizes, someone capable of gaining trust without immediately causing alarm. Investigators have never publicly identified evidence proving that this happened. However, the possibility remained part of the broader discussion surrounding the case. Another theory focused on opportunity. Some observers believed that whoever encountered Asha may not have planned anything in advance. Instead, they argued that a vulnerable child traveling alone during the night may have crossed paths with the wrong individual at the worst possible moment. This theory attempts to explain why investigators struggled to identify a clear suspect. But it also leaves many questions unanswered. Most notably, it fails to explain some of the unusual evidence that appeared later in the investigation. And then there is the theory that continues to trouble many people who have studied the case: the possibility that crucial information remains unknown to the public. Investigators rarely reveal every detail they possess. Sometimes information is withheld because releasing it could compromise future interviews or prosecutions. If that is true here, then there may be pieces of evidence that have never been disclosed, pieces capable of changing how the entire case is viewed. Unfortunately, only investigators know whether such evidence exists. Today, Asha Degree's disappearance remains one of America's most enduring mysteries. Not because investigators failed to search, not because people stopped caring, but because every clue seemed to open another question instead of closing one. A child left home. Witnesses saw her alive. Evidence appeared far from where she was last seen. Yet the final chapter remains missing. For Asha's family, however, this story is not a mystery. It is personal. Every passing year represents another birthday missed, another holiday without answers, another year spent hoping for the phone call that finally explains what happened. That hope is one reason the case continues to receive attention today. As long as the investigation remains open, the possibility of answers remains alive as well. Somewhere, there may be a witness who has never spoken, someone who dismissed an important memory, someone who knows a detail they never realized could matter. History has shown that even the oldest mysteries can sometimes be solved by the smallest piece of information. And perhaps that will one day be true for Asha Degree as well. Until then, her disappearance remains one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in modern American history. Thank you for watching. If you found this case interesting, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Which detail in this case do you find the most mysterious? Do you think the answer lies in evidence already discovered or in information that has yet to come to light? I read as many comments as possible, and I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy true crime, disappearances, and unsolved mysteries, don't forget to share this video with someone who might enjoy it as well. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and thank you for being part of Bright Dawn's True Crime.